final warm welcome to colleagues just joining us. You're in the right place. This is the Human Rights Funders Network AI and Human Rights Learning Lab, the fourth of our Learning Lab series this week. So just to let you know, captioning is available bottom right on your screen, on your Zoom navigation bar. You can select the language you want to caption in. Please do keep on mute throughout the conversations. We'd be grateful for a little silence whilst the speakers are contributing. And then we're going to open up after the speakers for Q&A. We are recording the session as well. So also for colleagues who are not in the room, hello, you'll be able to watch this. You are watching it already after the event. So without further ado, I'm going to hand to Kalia Miller, the Executive Director of HRFN.
Welcome, everyone. I see many of you who have joined in previous sessions this week, so I won't do a huge background today, but I want to again welcome you to our Learning Labs week for better preparedness, funding resilience. As I've said in our previous sessions, the reason that we are here is that we know that funders can do more and can do better to reach human rights movements, activists, and civil society facing crisis and closing civic space. We have a year-long process, and this is coming out of many years and many collaborations, including with some of you on this call. We will put into the chat the backstory, a learning journey we took last year, and the links to the Better Preparedness Funding Resilience project that is taking place right now. You can see in our slides, which we will share after this presentation, some more information about this. But the core of this work is several components. One is these learning labs, sessions where we get to exchange ideas about key and trending topics. Secondly, we have co-design labs for core funders who want to be part of building what we're calling a blueprint. Next slide. And one more. The next slide, we share what the blueprint includes. This is looking at all of the ways that funders, in conversation with civil society and activists, can do better to move money where it is most needed, when it is most needed. This will include coordination principles, protocols and mechanisms for coordination, building on outside ideas from beyond our field, crisis preparedness drills, understanding who is doing what, building relationships of trust within that ecosystem, understanding our taxonomy of risk and crisis, and utilizing early warning systems. This week has been incredible. Today's session is going to build on many of the moments where we have gotten outside of the philanthropic echo chamber. We've heard from new speakers, we've heard from people who have been working in different fields outside of philanthropy and within for many years, who are here to inspire our own thinking and shape what is going to come out of this blueprint process. If you are interested in being a part of this, you may click on the links and submit your interest in different levels of engagement, but please stay posted. Next slide, please. What will happen next is that we will be moving out of the discovery phase, which has shaped what we have designed so far, out of our learning labs and into the co-design. That will kick off in just a few weeks, leading into next year, where we will share back in public settings and ideally in a close conversation with many of you, what we have developed and how we will carry this forward. This is really about moving past dialogue and into action. We will be building out the tools and then putting them into practice. With that, I just want to highlight the last part of today's Learning Labs week. If you don't mind, next slide. Thanks, Adi. We have been talking, as I said, about early warning systems. We talked about legal and banking systems, solutions, how you move money in very practical terms. Yesterday, we had an incredible, fiery, and absolutely necessary conversation about decolonizing and localizing grant making. And today we are talking about AI and human rights. All of these sessions had resources that will be shared. As I said, today's slides will be shared with you all. And all of them but the legal and banking solutions will be recorded for those who weren't able to attend. Or if, like you, these were so rich, you can go back and listen to them. I am absolutely going to do that after today and to listen to the early warning systems and the decolonizing and localizing sessions. With that, we're going to get into today's content, and I'm going to hand it back to AD Mystery Frost to lead us through. Thank you so much for being here.
Julia, thanks so much. We are super delighted to have 4 speakers with us today who are going to share a range of different views, experiences, from understanding the regulatory frameworks shaping the development of AI to the building of AI related technology, and what the feminist lens looks like in terms of building progressive technology, what solutions civil society is building already to tackle human rights crisis and human rights related issues. So our lab today sets out with 2 broad lines of inquiry. The first is, what are the present and what could be the future impacts of AI on human rights, on movements and civic space? And the second relates to the objective that Kalia set out for this entire initiative. How could AI be used to assist in protecting and strengthening human rights norms, and indeed coordination between funders looking to assist civil society in addressing acute human rights crises? Today, we are so grateful to our speakers who are joining us. Daniel Leufer, a senior policy analyst at Access Now, Jacksmi Key, I beg your pardon, co-founder and cartographer at Numun Fund, Paola Mosso, the deputy director of the Engine Room, and Dan Walmsley, the chief AI architect at Automattic. So, colleagues, as we're hearing our speakers, please do use the Zoom chat, because this is going to be rapid today. We've got 7 minutes each for the contributions from our colleagues. And so as you're hearing the contributions, please use the Zoom chat for any questions you want to put to a speaker when we get into the open session, the Q&A session, or indeed if you've got a reflection or resources and links that you would like to share to move the conversation on. To get us started, I'm going to come to Daniel Leufer at Access Now. Dan, over to you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks a million for the invitation to be here. It's a really exciting initiative and very happy to try and help inform it away. So this will be quite an overview because of we're stuck with 7 minutes, but we should have a great discussion after, I think. So I wanted to talk a bit about some of the civil society work going on AI and human rights, and I will primarily focus on risks, but I think from other speakers we'll hear more about positive solutions. So the next slide, please. What we'll cover: what is AI, the impact of AI on human rights, the regulatory landscape around AI, human rights in the European Union's AI Act, and some questions and challenges. Go to the next slide, please. We could talk for years about what is AI, but very briefly, that has been made easier, this part of the presentation, because I guess most of you have used ChatGPT, you know a bit about it, but that is really a boom in the last year, basically, around a particular type of AI that's been called generative AI, that, you know, it's a subset of machine learning systems where these systems learn from huge amounts of data and generate content such as text, images, or music. They have been improving over the past few years, but 2022 was really unprecedented, especially in large language models, but also these multimodal models that generate images, video, etc., and which most people know from the deepfake context. There's also a lot of talk. I would say the term AI is hugely problematic, actually, and leads to a lot of confusions. I developed a website called aimyths.org that delves into some of these misunderstandings, because it also brings in a lot of stuff from science fiction, like, will robots become conscious? Should robots have rights? Will AI wipe out humanity by taking control of various systems, or all of these other scenarios that get mixed up with, you know, actual cutting edge stuff that's happening, but also real existing systems with real impacts. And we can go to the next slide. Thanks. And I put a couple of screenshots of some articles here, but there's an unlimited amount of Unfortunately, terrible stories that we could share about systems that go under the umbrella of AI. The one on the left there is the child benefit scandal in the Netherlands, where an opaque and incredibly discriminatory and racist algorithm was used to detect benefits fraud and destroyed the lives of thousands of people. People lost their children, people committed suicide, people went into debt, lost their houses, etc. There's also a New York Times article about Clearview AI, which is a company that has established a database of billions of pictures of people that it sells to law enforcement agencies around the world and can be used to identify people in all aspects of their lives. So there is this real increase in the use of these technologies in surveillance, predictive policing, and all sorts of very problematic uses. Next slide. I think, you know, in terms of what we need to focus on when we're talking about AI, we shouldn't be distracted by science fiction scenarios, but, you know, a lot of the work that people like Timnit Gebru and other people who've been working on this for a long time, really, you know, pushing that we focus on real existing systems that affect people in the here and now. I think it's very important that we look at rights-based approaches, particularly data protection and privacy regulation as a way to govern AI. That's often overlooked, and you know, there's an appetite to go after flashy new stuff. And I think public transparency as well is really key, knowing like what AI systems are being used, what our governments are using, what's on the market, and information about how they work, auditability, etc. Next slide. Yeah, the regulatory landscape, this is just a few of the things that are going on. It's almost impossible to keep up with the amount of initiatives, and this is really only EU, US, and international. There are a huge amount of local initiatives going on all across the world. The EU AI Act is probably the most elaborated and developed, but the US has been moving quickly, the G7, OECD, and then the UK had its AI Safety Summit, which will then take place in Korea, and then France in 2024. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the AI Act. What does it do for human rights? And we can delve into any of this in the questions, but ideally prohibitions on the most harmful AI systems. I put it to be confirmed because it's in the final stages of negotiation at the moment, and all of this is a bit up in the air. There should be bans on remote biometric identification, so facial recognition in public spaces, predictive policing, maybe emotion recognition, but the finer details are to be worked out. But essentially, the bread and butter of the AI Act is to provide transparency through a publicly viewable database, where we would know what's on the market and where it's in use in the EU, ideally. Accountability, documentation, and human oversight for a range of high-risk AI systems. And I put the categories there. I won't read them out. Next slide, please. What I would like to highlight is that in the AI Act work, we've been really working in strong coalitions to improve the AI Act. I put a link to kind of an updates page that we run where we put all of the work, but from the get-go, we worked with disability justice organizations, migrants' rights organizations, racial justice organizations. So really trying to expand the amount, you know, the coordination, because AI is something that touches so many issues that we've found that the working in coalition has been really effective. And I put a image there from the Protect Not Surveil coalition, which brought together migrants' rights organizations, digital rights organizations, and has been really an effective way to mobilize the civil society community around the AI Act. Next slide, please. Just a few final thoughts on big questions and challenges going forward. I think like we do need to keep repeating the thing to focus on real harms, because we hear things about existential risk of extinction creeping into politicians' speeches all of the time. But I do think it's important that while we have to focus on like systems that are here and now being used, deployed around the world in all sorts of contexts, we shouldn't let the future escape our view. Like civil society really needs to think about what is the future we want to see, how do we get there, and not let our imaginations be, you know, put out of use and only focusing on problems in the here and now. So that's an interesting question, I think, from a funding perspective, is making sure that there is still that foresight work happening while not neglecting the here and now. I think really our experience from the AI Act is that effective work on AI governance can only be done in coalition. Access Now is a global organization, and my colleagues in Latin America, in the US, and other regions where AI regulation is being proposed, this is the number one thing that I'm advising them and that they're trying to do, is to establish coalitions. We've seen in Brazil, there's been fantastic coalition work done as well. I think, unfortunately, a lot of work needs to be done to stop bad knee-jerk proposals, because I think the easy solutions that are being proposed to some of the problems are not the right ones. So that also requires technical research, around things like labeling AI content. And I think a final big question that the civil society really needs to address, and I think needs to get a lot more attention, is openness and AI. And I put a link to the article from Meredith Whitaker and Sarah Weston, another author, kind of delving into the complexity of what it means to have open AI systems. As many of you will know, open AI are notoriously very closed. And, we're really at a crucial moment where we could fall into the problem of repeating the last 15 years where we know nothing about the social media, where we didn't know anything about how these platforms work. We're begging for basic transparency. So I think this is crucial, is understanding both, what it means to be open, but also the infrastructural aspects of the problem as well. So there's a complexity that needs to be understood, I think, so that our proposals are going in the right direction. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Daniel, thank you so much for a whistle-stop tour of the regulatory landscape and some of the key concepts that we need to be familiar with as we go into the next part of the conversation. I would love to invite our second speaker, Jack, to take us away. Jack, over to you if you're ready and comfortable.
Thanks, Adi. I'm not sure if I'm ready and comfortable, but I will try my best. I'm a little bit jet lagged and it's quite late. But yeah, hi everyone. My name is Jack. As I mentioned, I'm a co-founder and co-ED of Numun Fund. Numun Fund is the first and only dedicated fund that supports activism at the intersection of feminism and tech, with a focus on leadership in the larger majority world or global south. And the reason why we have this focus, prior to Numun Fund, I've been a feminist tech activist for way too long. And we are focusing on this particular leadership is because those who are most affected by digital technologies and the developments of it are often the ones who are most excluded or invisible from this decision making. And we want to resource and strengthen the capacities of those who are most impacted to be at the forefront of defining, of framing, of shaping, and making of tech. And AI is really a particular slice of this reality and problem. And it is also one that is potentially very problematic because, as Daniel was talking about earlier, in terms of its very rapid implementation in critical areas and high-stake areas in all of our different parts of our lives. In the criminal justice system, like in Malaysia, we already apply AI in sentencing. There's no business doing that, but here we are doing it with no assessment around impact on finance, on health, and as we know, also on war and militarization that is happening in Gaza right now. So the techno-capitalist drive that is really fueling its current imagination and rapid adoption makes it a big problem, something that we all have to really pay attention to, whether we like it or not. And this exclusion is particularly impactful coming from work that is really at the intersections and organizing with different people. And feminism is really about interrogating kind of domains of power and understanding how this is affected. So I want to share with you 3 particular challenges highlighted by feminists engaged in this area, and also 3 examples of feminist engagement on AI that provides a different kind of response, I suppose. So the first challenge that is one that we know a lot, probably the most known around, which is the problem of data sets that are reflecting and amplifying bias, exclusion, and discrimination. So I remembered reading Katie O'Neill's book on weapons of mass destruction, and that was very, very revealing, really, going through piece by piece how bias is really encoded into data, which is then encoded into AI systems, which then becomes automated into decision making and amplifies all of the biases that is within that. Of course, Joy Bo Lam Lambrini, and she did the AI Anti-Woman. She founded the Algorithmic Justice League. And you also spoke about the work of Timnit. Of course, she highlighted initially the racial bias in Google's AI work and got fired as a result of that. A lot of trans activists has been really doing a lot of research work also to show how I guess, matrix of domination really then becomes encoded into not only AI systems, but also all of the other protocols and machinations that actually ends up disciplining different bodies at different points and different moments, especially like, for example, at checkpoints. So that's like one big piece that has really been surfaced, and that is really critical and important. If the data, it's the problem of invisibility and hypervisibility, and then how that translates into automation of decision making. The second challenge is really the issue of ghost workers that underpin the entire field of AI that is completely invisible. AI is being often spoken about and framed as this technology-driven utopia piece that we don't really understand about. And one day the robots will take over the world, and it's about artificial general intelligence, etc., etc. It's presented as something that is so disconnected from the actual amount of labor and people that is needed and effort to actually drive the system without huge amounts of underpaid labor in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America to code, label, categorize, and do that work of training the data sets. AI is nothing. It's a bit like the invisible labor of us in social media, right? Like as if it's free, etc. But actually, we are all doing that work. And that labor piece is completely absent. And there's been, I think Time did a really good journalistic report of this on workers in Kenya. But it's a big business. Like the data labeling business is at 11.34 billion. And 84% of this is outsourced to countries outside of America. And the key principles underlining this outsourcing is cost effectiveness and short-term commitments. What this translates to is cheap labor and insecure, dispensable, precarious labor conditions. So the feminist ask and recommendation for this actually is, you know what? Focus on this issue. This is the actual exploitation issue that we need to be talking about, that policy and regulatory and all of the other attention is just not paying enough on. And third is the crisis of imagination and visioning. There is a revolving door between a few tech companies to nudge what we should be concerned about. And we know this. This is also what's been covered in mass media, and in Numun as well. We are like a little bit concerned because in the application that we received last year, we had an open call. We didn't get that many applications that's really focused around either policy and internet governance or AI. And I think that's something to think about in terms of who's engaged in this issue and how. So now I want to turn to the three feminist response. I actually don't know how much time I have left, and I feel I'm talking very fast. I hope I still have a little bit of time. The three feminist response. The first one is really like, if we are suffering from a crisis of imagination, and we really are, it's the very narrow imagination that got us here in the first place, then the feminist response is actually, let's open up this imagination. What are the tools and conditions and frameworks that we can engage more people who are actually directly affected to be participating in not only the understanding piece of this work, but also the imaginative piece of this work. And one that I would like to present to you is the Trans Feminist Oracle, that you can also find in notmy.ai. And this is being done by a group of feminists in Brazil called Coding Rights. And they are really trying to build a feminist toolkit to question AI systems, like through a series of trans feminist principles in the design, in the thinking, imagination, and deployment piece of this work. So I think we heard about the principle of privacy, but there are so many other principles, right? Solidarity, embodiment, consent. Like, what does it mean? If AI can encode racist values and amplify that, what does it mean if we encode feminist values into thinking through the systems? And how would that amplify and change things? And that's a really interesting and good question to ask. And then the second kind of response to this is around participatory feminist research methodologies. That means not the research and the questioning about the impact of AI and how this could actually potentially interact with different fields shouldn't only be in the purview of academics or, highly skilled tech AI scholars that's basically consolidating knowledge in a few different places, but really thinking about how to engage those who are at the heart of these processes and systems to be thinking about what is the research question to begin with, what is the domain of inquiry, how do we figure these things out together and come through build knowledge around this. So the group that Timnit set up with a group of researchers in Africa, Asia, and so forth is really great at this. And what they're really also trying to do is, like, for example, they work with those who are workers in data labeling, to then also ask that question about labor and AI, right? Like building that piece of research together. And finally, I want to share a group that Numun is currently supporting and working with. And they are a group of activists who are trying to do journalism differently. And they are thinking about, so part of their work is really working with different human rights defenders and organizers in parts of Latin America to uncover different data sets and see what's missing in order to pull out patterns and tell stories about actually often quite violent things that to demand for accountability. So their role is really to try and tell different kinds of journalistic stories. And they have decided that as part of their methodology, they want to experiment in AI ethics to do a different kind of journalism. So they started to train their own models. They curated their own data sets in terms of labeling and in terms of scoring and so forth. They started to connect with other groups, feminists in the region that had their own autonomous servers to basically host and run the servers and run the programs. And then they were able to sort of find invisible patterns and uncover things like, corruption in El Salvador and the killing of teachers in Colombia. And that AI is not the center of that project. Journalism is. But it became an area where they were trying to explore and experiment. And so to kind of end, I suppose, is really a recommendation on resourcing, since we're a fund. Funding right now is very focused on either policy or AI for good. And as I was mentioning in the last story about the group that we're supporting, it's not an AI for good project. It's a project about journalism and trying to address kind of disinformation and so forth. And AI happened to be accompanying this process. So I also wonder, what are the conditions? And I also mentioned that we didn't get that many applications that explicitly spoke about AI or explicitly was engaging with policy advocacy. And I also worry a little bit because of the way in which this conversation and domain has been framed, that it is so exclusionary and so obtuse, right? So for resourcing, how do we resource so that we can make the conditions that are necessary to strengthen and facilitate the capacity of those who are most affected to be at the heart of participating and engaging in this debate, to be at the heart of defining what the priorities should be. So maybe not even good AI, but why AI at all? So yeah, I'll stop there.
Jack, thank you so much. Colleagues, a reminder that if you're hearing things, there's a very vibrant conversation happening in the Zoom chat. If there are things you want to follow up with and ask a specific question to any of our speakers, please do use the Zoom chat as we're hearing our contributions. Jack, once again, thank you so much. Coming next to Paola Mosso at the Engine Room. Paola, over to you.
Thank you, and thanks for bringing up the Oracle. I have it right here next to me for when I need some thinking, some creativity coming. It's also a really fun way to engage with others around technology in a way that it's not doomed and it's more joyful. So thanks for bringing that up. I wanted to start my intervention with sharing some challenges that we are seeing at the Engine Room around the environmental impact of the uses of emerging technologies and artificial intelligence. From October 2021 and April 2022, we conducted a research that explored areas that intersected between digital rights and climate and environmental justice. And we spoke to a variety of practitioners from across these areas and movements, where we highlighted 5 key intersections of cross-cutting concerns. I'm gonna share all of these reports and research in the chat right after my intervention, so don't need to look for them. I'll just paste them here. But one of the intersections that we saw was the area of data-driven environmental monitoring, because there's a lot of technology being used for these purposes, and we noted a lot of actors, a number of actors that were currently proposing the use of AI to foster sustainable land use or water efficiency, control pollution, and predict climate events. But a lot of the actors that we spoke with also noted that before thinking about that, it's important to think about AI itself becoming sustainable rather than being a tool or for sustainability in that way that AI can be used in a just way. So throughout the report, you can find more granular thoughts around this. But there are, since Jack, you also mentioned this, like there are initiatives to promote AI as a tool to help solve climate change. Well, there's a lot of actors, a lot of the ones that we spoke that emphasize that actually emphasizing on carbon intensive processes that prop up AI mean it's more important to focus on the sustainable AI rather than AI for sustainability. And there are a number of areas where important work that is already being conducted would benefit from further support and expansion. One of them is actually what we saw throughout this report is the possibility for these groups, digital rights and environmental justice or climate justice activists, to get together and find where are those areas that intersect their work. Similarly, like strengthening those connections and that community communications, conversations that weren't being necessarily fostered before. Also, in another critical area, we saw the importance of bringing responsible data considerations for the AI for good or AI for planet and data-driven environmental, climate, and sustainability initiatives. Finally, we see this across these conversations, the need to reliable measure the environmental impacts of these new technologies, emerging technologies, and as also artificial intelligence ones is generally perceived as an urgent priority to help assess what is the right technology and what are just approaches to using this technology for these purposes. And the previous interventions touch a little bit around this before, but I did wanted to make a note around the aspect of how these technologies can reproduce oppressive systems. Algorithm systems are designed by humans, therefore are biased and still hold the risk of replicating or enabling oppression and can end up amplifying bias and exclusion. There are reports in different emerging technologies that we produce that share this conclusions as well. And as I was saying, I will share them in the chat, but generally we see that a conclusion that we see over and over in our reports is that emerging technologies need to be rooted in justice, which needs that they need to be rooted in context and what justice means for that context. And for organizations and donors to develop continued interrogation of the necessity of these technologies to exist and to be developed and to be implemented, as well as developing more evidence on the benefits and evidence on the harms of these technologies. So moving past that, I did wanted to raise some examples and approaches that are citizen-led, that are developing their own models and are contributing or looking to contribute to social justice or human rights. There's many initiatives across the world. I see a lot of them in the South from a wide range of data-driven computational models and techniques, such as machine learning and deep learning, that are being led around with these goals in mind. For example, there's a feminist chatbot that looks to receive complaints of cases of digital gender violence that is being prototyped these days in Chile, where I'm located and grounded these days. The use of logic learning for detecting data breaches faster. Also, there's plenty of examples of machine learning being used for red flagging corruption schemes, and also natural entity recognition for addressing gender-based violence. And if you go deeper into all of these examples that I mentioned, all of them involve humans to advance democracy, to advancing human rights, to develop, analyze, you continuously learn from this technology. So none of this acts on its own. It needs to be designed and maintained and think through with these principles and human involvement. One example that I'm just going to share one example a little bit further because of time, but I wanted to surface this tool that is called iMurai Data Género. I'll share this as well in the chat. And this project aims to, it's from Argentina, and it aims to address the lack of transparency in the judicial treatment of gender-based violence against women and LGBTQ plus people in Latin America. And they did research. They did a research, and they are implementing a prototype these days. And they are looking to address data around feminicides, and particularly in the Buenos Aires area. And it will open the data from legal rulings as a step towards like feminist judiciary reform. So this is also connected. There's developers, technologists, there's advocates, legal teams, and it's a whole infrastructure that looks to take forward initiatives that reach or get us closer to social justice. And to finalize my intervention, I wanted to also share that we at the engine room help civil society embrace the complexity of working with technology, with emerging technologies, without losing the sight of the potential that they may have, as these examples that I was just sharing before. But as we've learned through our support, building knowledge about these high-paced technology developments can feel and can be really daunting for organizations. There's fatigue for integrating new technologies or new processes, especially when they are not familiar, or they are not in the context or decontextualized to their own realities, and where there's other priorities as well within the organization. So it can also create even double work, and which amplifies the burden of organizations. So we see across the work that we've done over the past years, we see the needs in order for more citizen-led initiatives to be fostered, the needs to increasing their ability, understanding, and comfort levels of using these emergent technologies, or not using them, but if they decide to use them, to be able to have the conversations and to take them forward. Also, support in adapting and integrating these technologies in effective ways. Someone is knocking at my door, and all my dogs are running. So just to wrap up, the perks of working at home. Support in adapting and integrating these technologies in effective and secure and responsible ways, similar to what we were seeing in our research, and develop and foster these cross-regional collaborations that, especially across the South, there's a lot of initiatives that we are seeing. There's a lot of imagination and innovation happening across civil society, and we see a lot of opportunity in getting those conversations happening that are happening, but fostering even more of those. So thank you, and my dogs say hi, everyone.
Paola, thank you so much. And yeah, the wonders of Zoom, we can't hear your dogs, so it's incredible, isn't it? But thank you so much, and great to hear how civil society in different parts of the world is leading progressive tech design, and particularly in collaboration across media, with traditional NGOs and movements. So yeah, thank you so much, Paola. Amazing. Okay, we're going to come to our final speaker, Dan Walmsley. Thank you for your patience. We're coming to you next, and over to you.
Hi there. Do you mind if I share my screen to present? Okay, great. Wait, where do I hit share screen? Oh, there we go. Okay, excellent. Okay. Let's see here. Always the Zoom windows are in the way of the play slideshow button. Okay, can you see that? Yes, great. Hello, I'm Dan Walmsley. I work at Automattic. We own a few different large apps like Tumblr and WordPress.com. We were founded by the creators of WordPress and So I work there on a number of artificial intelligence related projects. AI chatbots to help people build their site and understand what their goals should be, and image generators and layout generators and that sort of thing. Is this going to, there we go. This is a little bit about me. I have observed throughout the years that people in the progressive space love word clouds, and this is my word cloud. I am, amongst other things, an activist and a programmer and an architect. And in my distant past, I was also a stand-up comic, which is not on evidence today because I'm very nervous talking to all you accomplished people. So I have worked at the intersection of politics, activism, and technology for about 20 years, and really started out with my training with Al Gore to present the inconvenient truth slides, and I started getting really politically active, and then thought I could use my programming skills to help with that, and so we'll get to that next. So I think the main thing I could focus on here that I could contribute to the conversation is kind of a reflections on what it has been like to try and build tech to help different movements, and how that might inform how we think about AI, and how we think about our role as both adopters of technology, and also from sort of a policy point of view, what are the perils that we want people to avoid, and that sort of thing. Oh, by the way, these images I generated on my laptop by just typing in a good robot and an evil robot are presenting at the UN. Here we have C-3PO and something that looks like an evil C-3PO. So outcomes are hard to predict. I have a few stories in support of this, but it really starts with when I tried to build a platform to campaign on national days of action around climate change. And so I built a platform that would allow different organizations, whether it was Greenpeace or somebody else, to sort of connect and collaborate and actually share days of action and coordinate at scale across organizational boundaries. And I built sort of quite an effective architecture, and I was trying to get it sort of funded and adopted by these different organizations that I was already familiar with. And not one of them was interested because primarily they were in competition with each other, and they did not want to share their lists with each other or have somebody else poaching their donors and that sort of thing. Which is a shame, because the fragmentation of the climate change movement in Australia sort of continues to this day. It set this sort of space back significantly. And that was my first experience sort of thinking that I'd tried to do something in technology and it sort of intersected with the real world, and the outcome was not what I had expected. Once I moved to the States, where it's easier to sort of get things funded and make things happen, I became the VP of engineering at Purpose. And our goal there was to build progressive technology for progressive movements. And the first two big movements that were sort of the funders of that company was the Dove Movement for Real Beauty and Livestrong Foundation. The Dove Movement for Real Beauty turned out to be selling face whitening cream in India. The Lance Armstrong Foundation, we all know what happened there. And, you know, I think one of the lessons that I sort of take from that is sort of, you just can't be too careful about what you try and do. And in fact, it might not be possible to be careful enough because outcomes are hard to predict. Once I had been at Nation Builder for a while, I realized that it was very hard to build scalable technology on a campaign by campaign basis. This is one of the reasons why it's hard for individual organizations to build their own tech in the first place, is that, you know, prototypes are easy, scaling is hard. And so I helped create Nation Builder, and the initial campaign there that we were working on was Scottish independence. Sort of in my case, I was quite sort of proud to be involved in this multi-century long fight for independence of one people from another. And the campaign went quite well, but we didn't quite win. But we were trying to sort of help them out as much as possible. But in the process, we built this toolkit that was very much like the Obama 2008, like social media toolkit. But then over the years, we tried to sell that software to progressive campaigns. And unfortunately, we were told that because we also worked with people across the political spectrum, that they would not adopt our technology. And this was not helped by the fact that our primary competitor in the space amongst Democrats in the United States was a monopolistic incumbent that effectively was funding many of the Democratic operations, and it made it very hard for us to break in there. So we ended up working mostly with Republicans, culminating in my favorite outcomes are hard to predict moment, which was I left the company and a month later, Donald Trump became the biggest customer. It was March of 2015, and then went on to win the election. So this platform that I had built for the Bernie Sanders of the world ended up being used by Donald Trump. This leads me to sort of AI. AI is the most general software platform we've ever had, which means that it's really in the hands of the user as much as anything else, how it is used. And when I say user, I mean, you could be like an individual user or an organization leveraging this technology. And it is extremely hard to escape its entwinement with facial recognition or other people who might use what you're using for good, for ill. And I think if I was to say anything sort of as a reflection on the things that I've just mentioned, it would be, it's very important to be goal-oriented and to sort of try to step out of our own way when leveraging technology and distinguish between the policy implications of a technology at a large level and the sort of like organizational implications of, for example, using autonomous agents to augment human labor for like reviewing human rights violations in various places and things like that. So that's where am I at for time? I'm about 5 minutes in, I suppose. I also wanted to say AI is no longer a parrot. AI has traditionally been seen as, oh, well, you know, it's the facial recognition software, for example, has had issues because there were not enough non-white faces in the data set and things like that. Those days are kind of moving behind us as AI gets more sophisticated. The real policy direction of the AI is determined by a sort of a policy and alignment layer that is implemented by, say, OpenAI in order to, say, not produce chemical weapon recipes. This is both a blessing and a curse. First of all, it sort of means that some of those discussions around what goes into the underlying model that it was repeating, like you want the model to have read Mein Kampf, but not agree with it. You know what I mean? So like the alignment's actually much more important than the data that you put in. And so that is a change that I think affects how we think about this technology. And autonomous agents are coming. This is kind of a for better or worse sort of thing. In the very near future, and in some cases today, you can simply interact with an agent that will create other agents, and you can describe what it is you think they should do, what knowledge they have. You can upload private or public documentation. You can point them at a website. You can give them various tools. And before too long, it will be very commonplace to simply describe a workforce and then deploy that workforce against your resources. And that will both empower, I think, a lot of people to do a lot with a little, because these things are very cheap to run compared to a person. And they will also create, obviously, new opportunities for mass disinformation. One of the most troubling things that happened at Nation Builder was that there were some people who wanted to be customers who'd come up from South America, and they were like, well, you know, our boss is like a oil baron who, you know, regularly kills off people he doesn't like effectively or gets them out of the way. And we would like to use your technology to fill a data center with 19-year-olds who are going to pretend to want to vote for him, and they're going to deploy them all over social media. And we said, no, but like now you wouldn't have to ask. Now you could just do it. They could just go build those people and deploy them. So I feel like I'm at time. I have a whole bunch of other slides, but I'm going to pause there because that really was the sort of main point that I wanted to make. And when it gets to solutions, I'm happy to have that be part of the discussion.
And thank you so much. Yeah, I think great to open up in the last few minutes that we have together for some key questions. There's noting that, colleagues, there's such a rich sharing happening from our knowledge holders today that I suspect lots of you are, like me, digesting it as we're hearing it. So kick off this Q&A session by just asking a question that Dan and others, colleagues, you've all touched on, which is that there are positive applications that we want to be able to deploy, and companies that we're going to need to engage with as civil society. And I guess the question is, we see calls for self-regulation from the major tech corporations, and indeed the scientists behind a lot of this work, and progressive movements as well. So how do we square this? And Dan, you touched on it at the end, but who is showing leadership in terms of progressive tech amongst the biggest tech corporations? And I guess a related question, do we have to rely on them for some of what we are going to need as civil society in addressing human rights? So there's a couple of questions there. And colleagues, if you'd like to raise a hand, if you'd like to kick off in response, we might have time for that question and one more. So yeah, if you have anything you'd like to respond to on that question, please do. And
I can comment on the who's leading, I suppose, in the field in terms of their approach to regulation. It appears that the only thing people can really agree on is that as these models get bigger, as they have more compute, more GPUs, that their capabilities go up, and that increases the chance that they might do something dangerous. Present models are pretty much too unreliable to do like damage at scale, and that's somewhat of a deliberate design choice. More advanced technologies could have been deployed but have not. But it's also arguably self-serving of these large companies to argue for caps on the amount of compute that a company should have, or other kinds of things, because that could help stifle their own competition. Yeah. But I don't see a lot of work on policy stuff around like what should an AI say, only like how powerful it should be.
Daniel, thanks. Colleagues, anyone else who'd like to jump in on that? There is another question about perhaps the gap that might be opening up with civil society, and how to help that, how to help close that gap, which is coming as the next question. But yeah, anyone else who'd like to contribute on this one? Coming to Daniel. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. No, I can say a bit about the self-regulation thing. I put a letter in the chat as well that was led on by the Mozilla Foundation about the relationship between safety and openness, because I think if, I mentioned in my presentation that we could end up in repeating the last 15 years of what we had with social media platforms, where we know next to nothing about how they're used, where we're begging for basic transparency, where, we're starting to see now the transparency reports from platforms under the EU Digital Services Act. And if I remember the number correctly, I think they had like 1 or 2 content moderators who speak Arabic. That we found that out now because we've mandated that. I mean, we thought it was bad. I don't think people thought it was that bad. But we absolutely need to mandate things through regulation to be done, because we saw with social media that we cannot trust that the right thing is going to be done. And I think there's a lot of smoke and mirrors going around in the regulation conversation. These companies, OpenAI, etc., are calling for regulation, but as Dan said, I think often in a very self-serving way. So I think there's a very difficult conversation to be had around open source systems, because they can be abused much more easily. But this letter that I shared as well, the basic sentiment is that we probably need to take the risk on doing things openly and collaboratively and in a decentralized manner, rather than trusting a handful of small companies. But it's difficult because the abuses of the open systems are there. So it's a very tricky moment, I think. But relying on goodwill to overpower profit incentives, I think hasn't worked out too well so far.
Daniel, thank you. I'm going to pose our second and last question actually to Jack and Paola, if that's okay then, because Jack, you touched on something which is possibly the tip of an iceberg, a recent call which wasn't responded to from civil society colleagues with many proposals around AI and tech. And I wondered if your experiences at Numun and Paola at the engine room, how you're seeing this from a civil society perspective. Is there a gap opening up? And if so, how might we close that gap?
Yeah, it is sorry, Paula, I didn't know, I can't see you, and I don't know if you want to jump in first, so I'm just gonna jump in quite quickly. There is definitely a widening gap in the kind of like informal assessment of the field in terms of like feminists and activists who's doing this work in the larger majority world. Most of them are engaged in this from a critical research perspective. So we're not quite at the point where we're thinking about application and potential use and sort of engaging in the conversation around regulation. Even for myself, I find it sometimes quite difficult and obtuse to like, oh, why does it matter if the computational GPU, why is that specifically in that, in the proposal in the US government's tax safety thing? Like, it takes a lot of reading and building up a kind of like periphery of knowledge and perspectives and frameworks and shorthand, all of which has been developed in a very deliberate way to be very distant from your realities. No? So you really have to be very intentional to try and build this capacity and to engage with it, and then to really apply, then to do that translation work to apply that into your context and your priorities and your realities. So this is why I feel the work of people like Coding Rights, like Dare, is very important, because they do that context translation and they think about the ways in which you create moments, encounters, resources, and toolkits to facilitate that process of engagement. And that's the kind of work that I feel we need to be able to resource more around, to figure out from here to here, how do we get to that point, right? Like what is necessary from this moment to that moment, and who are the people and the different communities who are already thinking about this, who are already affected by this, to then begin the work of also like critical inquiry from their framework of analyzing power and technology. So doing feminist tech work, a big piece of it is also that translation work. And it's not just AI, it's in all forms of things, from access to kind of like, development and so forth. So that work will take time. And I think in the field of technology, we're not very patient because we're either panicking or we're very excited. And we don't allow for pace to take place. And actually, even in technology, pace is there and pace is necessary. So we almost have to think about doing this simultaneously, but also in a way that is expansive. And who can we bring, like, who are we building this together with, and be quite intentional about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I cannot agree more with the pace perspective that you're sharing, Jack. I think this is happening. AI on one side that englobes a lot of different uses and techniques and models. There's also a lot of other emergent technologies that are out there and that have been around, and there's these waves sometimes of which one takes more presence in the conversations around emergent technologies. And I think now we're in this AI wave that I think will stay longer because of the impact and the reach and the uses of this emergent technology. But I do think that there is definitely a gap in terms of like capacity building, to have conversations, to start thinking about how to develop these initiatives in a more grounded, just-based way. There are also initiatives that are trying to tackle this challenge of making space to have these conversations. There's the A+ Alliance, for example, that brings together groups and initiatives across the South that is commissioning papers, commissioning research, commissioning experimental developments. So we can imagine together, but also try out, take it forward, test it out, build it out. And I think those kinds of initiatives that take the shape of coalitions or coordination or movement building are really critical. And in different spaces, as Daniel was also sharing before, the importance of working together in this challenging perspectives, or in these challenging times where there's a lot happening, and then we need to take a seat, take our pace, and collaborate into understanding them and proposing the ways that make sense from a just-based perspective.
Paola, thank you very much. That, I think, will be our last contribution from our speakers. And just wanted to thank you all tremendously. I'm actually going to give this back to Kalia for the vote of thanks in just a moment. But I just wanted to acknowledge a request that we were not able to honor today that's been happening through the meeting. And it's actually very important to acknowledge the positive use of AI. But we had a request to turn on the AI companion to improve the accessibility of this meeting. And I'm sorry that we've not been able to do that. There was a decision about security and the use of AI companion for these discussions, but it is an object lesson in us needing to be more inclusive in how we enable participants in our meeting. So thank you to the colleague who raised that. And I'm going to come to Kilia for our closing remarks. I know we're a little over time. Thank you everyone for staying on. I'm going to come to Kilia to close the session.
Thank you so much, Adi, and thank you everyone for joining us, for staying with us, and for being part of this Learning Labs week. It has been inspiring, and as I said at the start, there's such a rich conversation. We will share more over the coming days in an email, but please stay in touch with us, continue to engage, and let us know if there are any conversations that would spark your work in the realm of better preparedness and funding resilience. Thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful day wherever you are.